beautiful evening it is tonight in Washington, D.C. We're excited to be here. My name is Dan Struble, and I am Associate Dean at Duke Divinity School. It is my pleasure to announce a partnership between Trinity Forum and Duke Divinity School. This is the first of 4 evening conversations that are co-hosted by Trinity Forum and Duke Divinity School. I think it will be very exciting. Jeremy Begbie is our very first speaker, and it is a wonderful opportunity to engage members of the Trinity Forum with Duke Divinity School and the theology that is happening there, and Duke University people with the Trinity Forum. So those of you from Duke, please welcome the Trinity Forum people around you, and those of you from Trinity Forum, please welcome the Duke people around you. I'm excited about this partnership. You know, it's probably a tactical error in this crowd to converse with one another again. This seems to be a very hospitable crowd. Everybody seems to be more than happy to talk to their neighbor. So I hope that you'll enjoy the event tonight. I know that the Trinity Forum folks are quite used to seeing top-flight theological speakers, and they will not be disappointed tonight. Jeremy Begbie is a world-class pianist and a world-class theologian, and he is very exciting, fun to be with, and I am often the butt of his jokes, so I'm hoping that I can get away with that tonight. I want you to, first, be personally enriched by this experience, and then second, I hope that it will tickle your curiosity about Duke Divinity School. Wes Brown, where is Wes Brown? He is sitting back there. Wes Brown, by the way, has been at Duke Divinity School for 34 years. And he can answer any questions that you might have about Duke Divinity School. Duke Divinity School is thought by many to be the leading theological school in the country. I know there are people who would argue with us on that. But we are a community of over 50 scholars and 650 students. We are deeply engaged in the church. All of our faculty members are expected to be either ordained or lay leaders within the church. They are not just expected to be scholars who think about theology. They are practitioners who live it out. And we're very excited about that. All of our students are engaged in the church. Their formation as leaders begins in the church, continues through the church, and most of them go on to serve the church. So we're very proud of that. We graduate hundreds of people every year who go out to serve the church. We also prepare theologians who train future leaders for the church. We have many initiatives that engage both the academy, and we are, of course, at the very heart of Duke University, one of the leading universities in the world, and we are very engaged in interdisciplinary discussions trying to bring Christ into the university. We are also engaged with the world. We have 18 centers and initiatives. I'll only address 3 of them very quickly. One is Duke Initiative in Theology and the Arts, and that's the one that Jeremy leads, and you'll learn more about tonight. Another is Theology, Medicine, and Culture. We have 4 MDs who are co-appointed both to the Divinity School and to the Med School at Duke. And then we have a Center for Reconciliation that is engaged in helping East Africa to reconcile its differences, Northeast Asia, and our new director will be focused on reconciling race in the United States. So we're very excited about it. Tonight you will learn more about theology and the arts. I'm very excited. And let me introduce quickly the president of Trinity Forum, Cherie, please.
Thank you, Dan. I'll just add my welcome music, beauty, and reimagining freedom. On behalf of all of us here at the Trinity Forum, we're very excited to be able to work with Dan and to partner with the Duke University School of Divinity, and pleased that each of you are here tonight. I also wanted just to acknowledge a few special guests who have joined us this evening. Our chairman of the board, Price Harding, is here, along with two of our trustees, David Speen and Bob Kramer. One of our advisory board members, Peter McDonald. I'll also note that both Peter and Price share a dual affiliation, not only with the Trinity Forum, but also with Duke. And we're also joined by Duke Advisory Board member Todd Chapman. So thank you all for coming. But also thank you to each of you. We actually have a completely full house tonight. We wish we could have accommodated more, but there are such things as fire codes, and we're rather obliged to comply, so we actually had to shut down registration early. And if you had friends who were locked out in a sense, fear not. We will have at least clips, selected excerpts from tonight's presentation on our website, which you can access at www.ttf.org, or feel free to follow along with the conversation either on our Facebook page or our Twitter feed at #Trinity Forum. For those of you who are not familiar with the Trinity Forum, we work to provide a space and resources for leaders to engage life's greatest questions in the context of faith. And we do this by trying to provide readings and publications which draw upon the classic works of literature and connect the timeless wisdom of the humanities with timely issues of the day, as well as sponsoring programs like this one tonight, to connect leading thinkers with thinking leaders and engaging those big questions of life, and ultimately coming to better know the author of the answers. It's been said that the great questions of the humanities relate to the purpose and content of the good life and the good society, what it is, what it means, and how it's realized. And for most of history, notions of beauty, truth, and goodness were considered to be primary in understanding such questions and responding wisely and well. The good life, it was assumed, as well as asserted, could not be envisioned or understood, much less lived, without knowing and rightly responding to these ideals. And one of the primary ways for understanding beauty has always been music. Philosopher Peter Krebs noted in one lecture that Plato, when he writes the Republic, spends only one paragraph on economics and 40 pages on music. One of Plato's contemporaries, Damon of Athens, wrote, "Let me write the songs of a nation, and I care not who writes its laws." And indeed, among Plato's fellow Greek philosophers who questioned everything, and especially their gods, there were only 9 gods that they did not question, and those were their muses. Millennia later, music still has much to teach us, not only about beauty and aesthetics, but as our speaker tonight will show, as well as tell, about our ways of apprehending the world at large, our understanding of unity, diversity, dissonance, and harmony, our conception of what it means to be human, as well as glimpses into the divine, and even our imagination of freedom itself. It is a provocative, ambitious, and fascinating argument, and it is hard to imagine someone more equipped to make it with verve, vision, and virtuosity than our speaker tonight, musician and theologian, Dr. Jeremy Begbie. Jeremy Begbie is the Thomas Langford Research Professor of Theology at the Duke University Divinity School, as well as the Director of Duke Initiatives in Theology of the Arts. He previously served as the Associate Principal at Ridley Hall at Cambridge, as well as a lecturer at Cambridge, and studied philosophy and music at Edinburgh University, theology at Aberdeen and Cambridge, and holds many degrees, including from the University of Edinburgh, the Royal College of Music, the Royal Academy of Music, Cambridge, as well as a doctorate from the University of Aberdeen. A professionally trained musician, he has performed extensively, not only as a pianist, but also as an oboist and a conductor. He also served as an ordained minister in the Church of England and has worked for a number of years as an assistant pastor in West London. His numerous books include Voicing Creation's Praise Towards the Theology of the Arts, Resounding Truth, Christian Wisdom in the World of Music, which won the Christianity Today 2008 award in the Theology and Ethics category, and most recently, Music, Modernity, and God. And so we're delighted that he has joined us tonight to talk to us a little bit about how we can think about music, beauty, and reimagining freedom. Jeremy, welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, it's a delight and of course a huge honor to address you. I've crossed paths with the Trinity Forum over the years, a number of times, and a few years ago I actually spoke at the Academy out there on the coast. Is that my right? Right by the beach, very nice. But I've never had the privilege of actually addressing a Trinity Forum event, so this is a huge honor. Thank you. And thank you, Sri, for the invitation. My thanks also go to Duke, my colleagues, in particular Dan and Wes, for their part in this evening's event. Trinity Forum, as Sri has reminded us, is, amongst other things, about connecting thinking leaders and leading thinkers. And it's very, very refreshing to find a body who still care about the way we think. Well, of course, there are different kinds of thinking, as I found out at high school very quickly. My favourite subject at high school was chemistry. Do we have any chemists here tonight, by any chance? Sort of, or chemistry? Okay. My father-in-law is a professor of chemistry, so it kind of runs in the family. But when I started chemistry, about, I don't know, 12 or 13, I just couldn't really understand much what was going on. I couldn't get my mind around it. But I was lucky enough to have a teacher who actually wanted us to get our minds around it. And typically he'd say something like, well, don't worry, think of it like this. And he'd grab 2 or 3 of the class and put them out in front of the class and then get them to act out a little dramatic sketch. Through drama, we learned how molecules form relationships and break them. A bit like watching Downton Abbey. A tiny piece of classroom theatre jolted my imagination and unlocked a world of meaning. The other day I came across a science writer, John Bohannon, who recorded a spellbinding TED Talk with professional dancers in order to explain the subtleties of advanced physics, superfluidity, to be precise. He even set up a competition called Dance Your PhD. Dance, he finds, jolts the imagination and unlocks whole worlds of meaning. At Duke University, one of my colleagues is Dr. Ray Barfield, who's a pediatric oncologist. We've given talks together, delightful friend. He was once faced, he was telling me, in his clinic with a 14-year-old in considerable pain. The doctors had asked her to describe the pain in words, and she did her best, and they medicated her, but nothing seemed to work. She was a talented artist, so Ray asked her to draw her pain, and this is what she drew. Ray then asked her to tell her story, which she did, the story of a very ordinary, happy child who was suddenly struck by illness, and now working out what kind of future was possible, now that sickness was always going to be with her. That was the story now, the narrative, that was going to make sense of her life. Now, Ray found he could start to treat her in the way she needed to be treated. Image and story jolted the imagination and unlocked for Ray a whole world of meaning. And music can do the same. At any particular point, there are 2 notes sounding. At any point, 2 notes sound at the same time. So what? In most of the music which streams at us day after day, 2 or more notes are sounding at the same time, whether it's four-eight or funk, Scarlatti or Sufjan Stevens, we hear the simultaneous sounding of differently pitched tones. Tonight I want to try to convince you that there's something remarkable going on here. This simple fact about music can deliver a jolt of the imagination, if we let it, and unlock one of the great themes of Christian faith, the theme of freedom. So I realized coming to the USA to speak about freedom, it's like going to Scotland to speak about golf. Your nation is built on a charter of freedom, and what's worse, freedom from the British. And the issue of freedom surrounding even outside my hotel room here. Straight outside is a picture of Washington crossing the Delaware. I mean, it's great, folks. I'm just like it's like the fact that someone left an extra, a huge bottle of shampoo next to the bath in the same. These things hurt. As a future reference, be sensitive about this. And the issue of freedom surrounds us, of course, at every turn. If I say simply gun control, it would make the point. A few days ago, a colleague in the UK said to me, Richard Bork, a New Testament scholar, said to me, "You're going to the US to talk about freedom?" Well, yes, I am. I'm going to suggest when it comes to freedom, most of us in the West have been trapped by ways of thinking that often blind us to what freedom is all about, especially Christian freedom. Not far from where I live and work, this man used to lecture. This is Ludwig Wittgenstein, a philosopher who lived and worked at Trinity College, Cambridge, for many years. Key thing about Wittgenstein, you have to remember, is he looks remarkably like Dr. House. A point which has absolutely nothing to do with anything that I'm going to say. So don't worry about it. Wittgenstein once wrote, his philosophical investigation, very late work, "A picture held us captive, and we could not get outside it, for it lay in our language, and language seemed to repeat it to us inexorably." And he's talking here about his own early theories of language, but his words could apply to the way a lot of us think about freedom. We get stuck in habits of mind that trap us. And the word picture here is apt. I've got nothing against images, per se, or the eye. But I do think we've often been too trapped by visual ways of thinking, that is, patterns of thinking that take their cue from the way visual perception operates. And when it comes to freedom, that's been disastrous. I think I'm going to show them, I hope. So I'm talking about relying excessively on one sense and the way it operates. Is there anything wrong with the eye or music, per se? Music, I believe, can jolt us out of those ways of thinking, jolt our imaginations, and unlock the world of authentic gospel freedom. What do I mean? Well, let's dig in. Let's think about the way we see the world. Let's point out something very obvious, and that is that you can't see two different things in the same place as different. When a painter paints red and yellow on the same space on a canvas, the colours will either hide each other, red hides yellow, yellow red, or if the paint is still wet, they'll merge into orange. We can't see red and yellow as different as red and yellow in the same space. That's the way our eyes work. Objects in our visual field occupy bounded locations, discrete zones, and can't overlap without hiding each other or turning into something else. We can't have red and yellow in the same space visible at the same time as red and yellow. By the same token, objects in our visual field can't occupy two places at the same time. Things are either here or they are there because they occupy a discrete bounded zone. Very simple. The trouble starts when we transport that way of thinking into our thinking about freedom. Let's begin by thinking about God and the world. We think of God and the world like two objects in visual space. God up there or out there, and the world down here. Clearly we're going to have problems if we want to say God gets involved with the world. Because how can God do things in the world, change things, alter things, without interfering with the freedom of the world? Surely the more active God is in the world, the less room the world will have to be itself, the less free it will be. It is as if God and the world are competing for the same space. If the world is going to be really free, it needs to be free as far as possible from God. Transcendent is the word sometimes used for that. I think wrongly, but that's the way it's often used. So in the West, we meet a worldview broadly known as deism, which was originally an English invention, I'm afraid. In its strong form, the idea is that God started up the world, but is now not involved with it. God becomes the absentee landlord, and like many landlords, not that keen on getting involved. Transcendent, yes, but not immanent. And in the weaker forms of deism, we're told God intervenes every now and then. And now, don't get me wrong, of course I believe God does extraordinary things and miracles. Of course I believe that. But if we overplay that language, it can suggest God is basically outside a world that really doesn't belong to him, but every now and then he's going to break in, like a burglar, into a home that doesn't belong to him. So we need to be careful of that language. It also implies that God is only active in some places at some time, but not the rest of the time, or in other places. The other extreme, of course, is some kind of merger, where we say the created universe is in some sense divine, or part of the divine. Orange theologies, we might call it. Very much in vogue at present. Whole sections in Barnes & Noble you'll find devoted to orange theology. The problem here, of course, is that Jewish Christian scriptures make it very clear that God is not the world and the world is not God. There's an absolute distinction, not separation, distinction between the two. We're not to worship the creation, only God. Paul in Romans 1. A picture. It's often captive. Then what about God and us? God's freedom and our freedom. It's basically the same story. We've moved to think about God and us, God and human beings. Because on this picture, if I am here occupying this space, and God tries to get in on this space, I have to shrink. The more of God, the less of me. Or the other way around, the more of me, the less of God. It's a wonder that some of the strongest currents of modern atheism trade on the belief that worshipping God crushes your dignity. This is, if you know, writings of Ludwig Feuerbach, one of the great atheists of the 19th century. To enrich God, he said, man must become poor. That God may be all, man must be nothing. Unquote. In other words, God is everything, we're nothing. And if human beings are going to grow up, they've got to push this deity out, this oppressive God of the Bible and Christianity. They must drive this God out. As the late and great Colin Gunton used to speak of modernity, he spoke about it as the displacement of God. The word is very telling. We must move into the space once occupied by this fictional deity and recover our diminished or displaced dignity. If you look actually behind a lot of the writing of the so-called new atheists, very often as the deist God, they're objecting to this God because if this God's always interfering or getting involved with you will not grow up. So folks, grow up is what they say. Be human, be fully yourself, and don't rely and humiliate yourself by relying on some so-called deity, some kind of father figure who's going to make it all right in the end. Well, we say, oh, that's atheist, we would never do anything like that. But within the church, I'm afraid, we find similar habits of thinking. Think of the historic debates over what happens when someone comes to faith. Someone comes to faith, finds the glorious freedom of the gospel. Wonderful. Whose work was that? On one side, theories which make God look like a puppeteer or tyrant. It's all of God, nothing to do with you. It's funny. Does that mean my decision or my initiative or whatever had nothing to do with it? On the other side, my decision for God or for Jesus takes center stage, and believing in God becomes a completely self-generated act, an expression of my personal space. Doesn't sound quite right, does it? So you have so-called kind of extremes, extreme Calvinism on the one hand, and so-called Arminianism on the other. Or else we try to divide things up. We say, well, God does so much. You know what, 50%, maybe 70%, maybe 90%. But I just want that little 10% that's me. Right? How are you thinking? You're thinking visually. You're thinking in terms of finite space. The more of God, the less of us. The more of us, the less of God. A picture. course, this applies to you and me. I'm here, you can't be here also. The more of you, the less of me, and vice versa. Your freedom is one at the expense of mine. And this brings us face to face with one of the West's most cherished traditions of thinking about freedom, so-called libertarian theories, where freedom is essentially freedom from. To describe the process of becoming free is to describe a process of removing external constraints and obstacles. Allied to this is the assumption that freedom names the power of choice. You maximize choice and you maximize freedom. So freedom of choice means typically freedom of opportunity, freedom of consumer choice, and very often both together. So you'll know the more brands of coffee you have to choose from, Starbucks around the corner, the freer you will be. As for freedom becomes the power to determine your own choices, so long as you don't deprive others of their good or impede their efforts to attain their good. Take these two strands together, freedom names the power of unobstructed choice, or even more crudely, the ability to choose otherwise, spontaneously. David Bentley Hart, with characteristic bluntness, what we habitually understand democratic liberty to be, what we take that is our most exalted model of freedom, is merely the unobstructed power of choice. The consequence is that we moderns tend to elevate what should at best be regarded as the moral life's minimal condition to the status of its highest expression, and in the process reduce the very concept of freedom to one of purely libertarian or voluntarist spontaneity. The power of unobstructed choice. In its extreme form, then, humans become really quasi-godlike, godlike figures, with a potentially infinite space to act out without any influence from outside our own desires, with no limits to what we can do in principle, and no limits to our progress. The underlying drift of thought here is wonderfully enshrined in that indispensable tool of reliable wisdom, Wikipedia. Under the entry of freedom. Freedom in philosophy is the human value or situation to act according to one's will without being held up by the power of others. From a philosophical point of view, freedom can be defined as the capacity to determine your own choices. It can be defined negatively as an absence of constraint, subordination, and servitude. To be fair, they go on to speak of a positive side, but significantly start with the negative, the absence of constraint. So then we bump into a passage like that you'll find in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, where Jesus says, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed. Yes, indeed. What he was saying, of course, the Son will enable you to pursue your own good in your own way, to determine your own choices, so long as you don't deprive others of their good or impede their efforts to attain. Now, of course, there's some truth here. You release someone from prison, they will be free. But is that the heart of freedom? Simply removing constraints. One of the most important social studies to emerge in North America in recent years comes from Christian Smith, sociologist at Notre Dame. Massive survey, famous survey now, the spiritual inclinations and aspirations of 18 to 23-year-olds in North America, emerging adults, he calls them. I quote with permission from an email he sent me, summarizing his finding. Quote, emerging adults believe absolutely in the sovereign individual and insist on that for themselves, but have much less idea what is good or best or right to do with their freedom. In other words, I strive for a clear space without any constraints, but I'm not sure what to do with that space. And therein lies the paradox. We're convinced about what we need to be freed from, but not what we need to be freed for. If you've ever parented an adolescent, this will be very familiar territory. I think of four children myself, I've been through this. All know what they want to be freed from. But for what? It's very hard to think about, as long as this picture holds us captive. God world, God and us, you and me. Let's take it a further step and talk about God. I expect many of us here, perhaps most of us, are Christians, and we want to be orthodox, at least on Sundays. And claim allegiance to the doctrine of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, especially if we're part of Trinity Forum. But in practice, we keep the Trinity fairly quiet, because it's so hard to think about it. You go to Fountains Abbey in England, in the guidebook, the chapel, they'll tell you that in this chapel a sermon was preached every Sunday of the year, apart from Trinity Sunday, because it was considered too difficult. And indeed, it is with the eye. Because you can't have three colours in the same space visible as three distinct colours. You can't see three things in the same space at the same time as three. So we turn all English and talk about balance or mystery and try to change the subject very quickly. And there are all sorts of compromises, exotic compromises on offer, as the history of doctrine will show you if you think with the eye alone. Top left, this is God is one. Of course, where's the threeness? This is Unitarianism. Here you've got threeness, but where is oneness? This is tritheism. This is a subtler one. I hope I'm not going to offend anyone who has this as the symbol of their church. But essentially what this is saying is, this is where God really is, without any distinction, but he's Father, Son, and Spirit on the outside. That's a heresy, that's a Sabellianism or modalism. Very, very common, especially in the Western Church. Is it any accident then that the commonest heresies with regard to the Trinity are also the easiest ones to visualize? Is it any accident that most of the illustrations we'll hear on Trinity Sunday sermons, if you're part of a church that has a thing called Trinity Sunday, and we will strongly believe in the Trinity, that they'll mostly be visual, the illustrations. Tricycles, clover leaves, rabbit's ears, threefold drain pipes. I've heard I've not yet heard a sermon on Trinity Sunday which does not begin by saying something like, well, we approached a very difficult subject this morning, and some of the greatest minds of the last 2,000 years wrestled with this one. I'm not much of a theologian myself, we have no theologians here, but we'll try to make some sense of it. And then out come the drain pipes and the rabbit's ears, all in the paraphernalia against the end of the sermon. Phew, we can go back to believing in the one God again. That's over for another year. What have you told them? You told them that Trinity is basically a problem to be solved. And it's an optional extra. And it's also, you've told them, it's basically an idea, not a reality, a concrete reality. So you greet them with the glorious good news of the gospel, that God is a problem to be solved. No wonder we're in a bit of a mess. A picture holds us captive. But suppose we remove ourselves from the world of the eye to the world of sound. I think we'll get a jolt of the imagination. It comes not through images, but through sound. The sound you are now hearing fills the whole of your oral space, your heard space. You don't say of that note, well, it's here, but it's not here. Okay, you can say it's come from here. You know roughly the direction it's come from. But what you actually hear fills the whole of your heard space. There is no zone in your heard space where the sound is not. Suppose I play a second note along with that first. The second tone also fills the same heard space. Yet I hear it as distinct, irreducibly different. In the world of heard sound, two different things can be in the same space at the same time. One tone doesn't take up more space than the other. There's none of this more of the first, less of the second. We're not speaking of objects jostling and competing for the same for room in the same spatial box. Or to put it another way, notes don't have to get in each other's way. Of course, sometimes they do. The tenor sings too loud in the choir. Or the bass guitar plays too loud. I've got a lot of problems with bass guitars. Any bass guitarists here? That's all right. In Britain, they're all called George. And you're busy trying to, say a very kind of holy prayer before the service. You go, George, could you try this? Totally in a world of their own. And sometimes they play too loud and they really kind of blend with the others. But there we go. Never mind. You don't have this problem. I don't want to land this particular one on you. No. Notes don't have to get in each other's way, nor do notes merge or have to merge. They can sound through each other. They can, in a sense, be in each other while being audible as two distinct tones. They can interpenetrate while remaining distinct. Now, of course, someone says visual art can suggest this, surely, very powerfully. Indeed, it can suggest it, as in the art of the great 20th century painter Paul Klee, who painted a whole series of musical polyphony, the mixing of many voices. And the paintings do radiate a sense of the overlapping of different colours. But the fact remains that we're not perceiving distinct colours in the same space. Even when the colours do intertwine, they are perceivable as different only in discrete units. That's not to denigrate Klee's achievement, it's simply to highlight a difference between two types of perception. And let's not forget another feature, a very interesting feature of vibrating strings that we can play, I hope, on the piano. I take this note and I pull down the key very slowly so the damper comes off that string. I haven't played the string, but the string is now free to vibrate. Take my word for it. Then if I knock the key one octave below, you hear that? Particularly in the front row, if you're hearing that. I've set that upper string off. The reason is because it is the first harmonic of that. Within that note, there's a bit of an octave above, and there's a bit of another note, and a bit of another note. Every single note is a sounding chord. Isn't that a wonderful thought? And what it's doing is there are things in that lower note that are resonating with that note. And this note is saying, hey, we recognize you. And it's sprung into life. That's known as sympathetic resonance. The two tones we hear then aren't in competition, and they don't just allow each other room. The lower sound establishes the life of the upper, frees it to be itself, enhances it what's more. And of course you can take it much further, that you can probably get lots of other things vibrating around now playing them. I didn't play any of those notes. Okay, well let's get some more going. I didn't play any of those notes. They were just set off and they enhance each other. Indeed, they become richer and fuller as they resonate with each other. Now, music exploits these two features, these two phenomena of interpenetration and sympathetic resonance to the nth degree. And it means you can do all sorts of fascinating things in music that's very hard to do in other art forms. One of the most interesting is something called bitonality, so you can have things played in two keys at the same time. For instance, the end of Hitchcock's film Psycho, which I'm sure you've seen many, many times, in its original form, ends like this. Now what's going on there is you have A flat minor with T minor. And these two actually don't really belong together. And you'll remember Psycho is about a man who has unresolved duality. So you see a picture of Norman with his mother, that's the duality. That's the picture, but the sound does it so much more effectively. And that's how the film ends. It doesn't say, and they all live happily ever after. Right? We're right there. I had an experience not so long ago. I was speaking to the Trinity Forum in London, and I was standing between the room where I was speaking, where they were singing a Tim Hughes song, Here I Am to Worship, which is in D major, as I'm sure you all knew. In the church next door, someone was practicing Finlandia. 2 minutes, I heard them together, A flat and D. It reminded me instantly of Psycho. A flat and D. Perhaps best not to explore that any further. But here's one of the most interesting examples of bitonality. You ready? This is Downton Abbey theme tune. It's full of bitonality. It loves this sound. Do you recognise that? You see, it leaves this bit of ambiguity before you've heard anything, seen anything, spoken any words. You're hearing, will she marry him? It also means if you do fascinating things in opera, like you can have people singing about different things at the same time. And I think I've even got an example here, a very interesting song by U2, where you've got a low voice singing about a man crawling up a sheer face of love like a fly on the wall, and a gospel voice singing about love coming down from above at the same time. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Over and over again, Christian faith is trying to say together, not this and then that, together, simultaneously. And it's a very simple use of a very powerful technique. Or one last example, John Bell, leader of one of the musicians of the Iona community in the west of Scotland, has a very interesting setting of Psalm 88, which is one of the psalms that doesn't end happily. It's a cry for justice that's left raw and unresolved. And he has the setting of this, a sung setting, with some accord like this. And there's a little asterisk, that goes to the footnote, said, this is not a misprint. That's how it ends. Because that's how the psalm ends. Okay, enough said. Now back to freedom. We can revisit those dilemmas about freedom we touched on earlier. Think through sound. First, there's God and the world. Think through sound, and we don't have to think of God's freedom and the world's freedom vying for the same limited space. The lower string doesn't drown out or merge with the upper string. It liberates the upper string to be the string it was made to be. Those with ears to hear, let them hear. And something that's audible in the same differentiated space. Now we're beginning to open up a really biblical way of understanding freedom, the world's freedom. God is transcendent, yes, but that means he can be free for the world, and the world can be the world it was created to be. God is in the business of freeing the world to be the world he made it to be. So now this is the transcendence of the giver, the God of love, who is transcendent for the world, and not simply from it, because he wants it to flourish. God and us, God's freedom and human freedom. No longer need we think of God's freedom and our freedom struggling for the same space. God is in the business of freeing us to be the persons we were created to be. This is the gospel. Now you would wonder, the way we often communicate it, the divine project is to rehumanize us, not dehumanize us. And third, you and me, your freedom and my freedom. On the other model, freedom is about me, the individual pursuing my own good in my own way, provided I don't impede others. Think through musical sound, and that model simply falls to bits. In this piano chord, these strings don't simply allow each other room, or tolerate each other, far from tolerant. They build each other up, enhance and enrich each other. Those other strings become fully themselves in relation to each other. They create a richness of sound not possible on their own. You can make the connections, I'm sure. Freedom is not fundamentally, in the Christian view, about self-assertion in a vacant space, a space into which we project ourselves until we bump into somebody. Freedom is not possession, it's something that happens to us in the Christian view. The Christian faith declares we are freed by the other, for the other. Not far from where I work, an extraordinary project called Reality Ministries has been set up. This was set up by a young man called Jeff McSwain, just finished a PhD, actually. Great scholar as well, so really good. This is for teens and adults with and without developmental disabilities. At one of the shows I went to, one of the musical evenings, I remember hearing from a young man confined to a chair, wheelchair 24 hours a day, able to talk only through a computer device. One evening he told us, in effect, this was the one place in his life where he felt truly free. But also, just as important, when we listened, and as the team got to know him, we too found we were freed. Freed from inhibitions, from years of prejudice, freed from the fear of showing affection physically, and many other things. And what's so interesting about this enterprise is the arts play a part in virtually every activity that they're involved in. Music, dance, others here designing crafts and preparing food for their local community. So of course we need to be freed from, but not from God or from others, basically, but might be a bit of that from others, but freed from something called sin. Freedom isn't about preserving my space fundamentally, although at times we might need to do that. It's not basically about increasing the choices open to me, though it may involve that. Deeper down, at the deepest level, it's about being freed by another who is committed to you, whatever and forever. And being freed for that person who you can love in the same way. That way we become the people we were meant to be, in the same space. In other words, baffling as it seems at first, freedom is a gift before anything else. Christians say a gift of the Holy Spirit as we come to know the Son who himself is fully free. In a recent visit to South Africa, I often find myself singing, South African national anthem. When I sang it, it evoked to me an amazing sense of togetherness, even though I hardly knew the hymn and often hardly knew the people with whom I was singing. Part of the reason for that, no doubt, was that I knew this song had held thousands together during the fierce years of apartheid. But a large part of it was also simply its four-part harmony, in which no vocal line predominates over the others. See, unlike the British national anthem, or indeed the American one, we don't have a melody with accompaniment, although we would tend to sing it like that. When they sing it, they will instantly harmonize. So actually all four parts, as are as important as all the others. Your voice and all the others fill the same heard space. It's not a space of 100 separate voices, each with their own exclusive space, but a space of overlapping sounds, an uncrowded, expansive space, where voices free each other. Why was solidarity in South Africa so often expressed in harmonious song during the years of oppression? Many reasons, I'm sure, but one of the most important is that when they met to sing, the music provided a taste of authentic freedom, when in virtually every other sense they were not free. Put it another way, they couldn't see freedom with their eyes, but they could begin to hear it. That's what music does for a lot of people, believe me. It was in part from African sources that the vast river of jazz emerged. So the Irish poet Micheál O'Shiel writing of jazz improvisation. Moody solos, unique, the stamp of one voice, then pure concert as an ensemble improvisers, hearing in each other harmonies of cross purpose, as though being ourselves, we're more capacious. Isn't that wonderful? We become ourselves, we become more capacious. Well, our culture will tell us just the opposite. I mean, there's a lovely play on the word cross purpose. This is the purpose of the cross, to produce this kind of harmony. In this connection, I think of Thomas Tallis, the extravagant 40-part motet spent in Allium in the 16th century. Around 1573, this was written. This is absolutely over the top and quite ridiculous, and an absurd showing off in music that's probably never, ever been equaled, where 40 different voices weave their way in through each other with different melodies. And despite the sonic profusion, it never really sounds jammed or crowded. Each voice is enabled to become more fully itself. says, he's unable to get it, I'm sorry. What it was recording, slight technical problems, it's recording of singing in tongues, 3,000 people singing in tongues. Whenever I play Tallis in Pentecostal settings, they say, hey, that's singing in tongues. Isn't that interesting? You've had the experience of singing in tongues, perhaps say, just plant a chord and 2,000 or 3,000 sing around it. It is the most extraordinary, liberating experience. Of course it is. Because it's the same phenomena that Tallis recognized and just composed a bit more thoroughly. And yes, of course, you've got there already the Trinity, the three-note chord. A resonance of life in three, the three reciprocally interpenetrating without exclusion or merger, irreducibly distinct, yet constituting the one divine space, each animating the other, establishing and enhancing the others. If you know anything about Trinitarian theology, you know the particular term was used fairly early on called perichoresis, glorious musical sound of perichoresis, mutual indwelling of the persons of the Trinity. Our freedom, human freedom, finds its source and root in God himself. Think of John's Gospel, where we discover Son and Father are fully divine, yet are in each other, dwelling in each other. What my Cambridge colleague Richard Balkan calls the in one anotherness of the Father and Son, alive in and through each other. Would anyone like to draw that for me? It is incredibly hard. Not even the Good News Bible with all its diagrams. They don't try that one. Relatively easy to hear. Relatively. This is what the church has been struggling to articulate for centuries. To bring the words of Scripture, which are pressing upon us this wonderful threefold God. But so often we've been captive to the wrong imaginary. Charles Taylor would call it. Yes, of course I know, you want to make all sorts of qualifications, and I haven't even started talking about sin and dissonance. But I hope I've done enough to show how musical sound can jolt the imagination out of its habits, habits which have often blinded the church to the real glory of gospel freedom. To press the point home, a piece of music. A few years ago, two groups met in South Africa. The one was a vocal ensemble from the University of Oxford, specializing in Renaissance music, called Ifajilini. The other, a gospel choir from Soweto. They listened to each other, the way they sang, they explored differences as well as commonalities, and then they made a CD together, recording tracks from live worship in churches, studios, and the open air. The combination is extraordinary. You'll find Gibbons combined with a township hymn, 14th century Mashur with Cape Town cross rhythms. This, which you'll hear now, is a chant for peace written during the apartheid era, and over it the Oxford singers weave a Gregorian chant setting of the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. Grant us your peace. Two visions of peace together. And then they improvise on that chant as they sing together. I do hope this will behave itself, but yes, here we go. This is the South African one. This is the chant for peace, political peace. styles, two musical traditions in conversation, ethnic groups together from radically different and often hostile backgrounds. But here, all made possible together by the extraordinary capacity of music to combine radical difference in the same space, free space. And I'm telling you folks, if you're stuck in contemporary versus traditional and all those things, here might be a way forward. In closing, I hope you can see what's happening here. Music is not simply providing a few handy and entertaining illustrations, kind of sugar-coating for the gospel so that it slips down the throat a little more easily. Music is unlocking the content of the gospel, jolting the imagination out of some of its worst habits. So gospel truth can be understood far more deeply in all its strangeness and wonder. And I say understood as well as felt. It applies to the intellect as well as the rest. That's what I found as I've been privileged to give talks in churches, schools, colleges, universities, to believers, agnostics, atheists. Indeed, a particularly memorable time I had with a very distinguished Muslim cleric from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. We had 2 hours together on the Trinity using music. And if this is so for music, so it is true for all the other arts. Each art form has its own ways of jolting the imagination to unlock the biblical gospel. It seems to me this has massive importance for the church today, for the way we understand and communicate the Christian faith in the 21st century. There are many associated with the Trinity Forum who rightly stress the importance of a certain kind of rational argumentation in exploring and commending the faith. We need that more than ever, and I've been involved in a great deal of that myself. Amen. But an argument, remember, is always cradled in what Charles Taylor has called an imaginary, that is, a way of making sense of things, an overall way of making sense of things, a way of connecting our ideas and experience, which works at such a deep level we don't even think about it. I can argue the hind legs off a donkey about freedom, but if the imaginary built into my language is all wrong, real freedom won't get a chance to be heard. That's what C.S. Lewis managed to demonstrate for us par excellence. He would rightly be famous for his arguments, and he was a great debater. He knew how to face down the hardened skeptic. But I reckon it's his fantasy literature that's had the biggest impact. Wardrobes, Narnia, always winter but never Christmas. See, he's unlocking biblical truth for you, jolting your imagination. So you can't see these things in the same way again. That's what the prophet Isaiah did for the Jewish exiles in Babylon, who couldn't believe there was any future for them stuck out there in exile. He didn't give them a lecture on international relations, although there's a place for that. He uses poetry, imagery, allusion, metaphor, simile, rhyme, and rhythm. I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. I will give drink to my chosen people. New things will sprout forth like plants. Your God is whimpering like a mother in labor. What's Isaiah doing? He's jolting their imagination and telling them, therefore, things don't have to be like this. The writer Sarah Clarkson, I think lives in Oxford, says it very well. A well-known writer, but a very interesting one. We face a failure in our culture, she's talking about, not so much of rhetoric as of imagination, that faculty that C.S. Lewis called the organ of meaning. We face a world struck by a blindness of biblical proportions in which people have physical sight, but no insight. That inner viewpoint informed by the eternal, by which we perceive value and depth, far beyond the mere surface of things. Insight, which literally means to gain an accurate, intuitive, and deep understanding of a person or thing. Remember Ray Barfield with a 14-year-old. So at Duke, a few years ago, we established a program called Duke Initiatives in Theology and the Arts. And our dream here is to train leaders of the future to do the kind of thing I've been trying to demonstrate this evening. To find ways of allowing the arts to jolt our imaginations so the gospel can be unlocked in ever fresh and yet faithful ways. In a young culture that is increasingly savvy when it comes to the arts, we dare not go round in the small circle of a few ideas we learned some time ago. One of your senior members at Trinity Forum, a dear friend, artist Mako Fujimura, said recently, I quote, "The training of the imagination can only be done if there is a rooting in the highest caliber of scholarship," unquote. Quite so. That's why we're at Duke. I'd like to say, Duke is a very good university, and at a recent fundraising, a distinguished Duke alum got up and told the assembled throng that Duke was the apogee of Western civilization. Now look, folks, I like American rhetoric and exaggeration, but there are limits. You know, I think the Sistine Chapel was slightly bigger plane, maybe. But okay. Now, I also teach at Cambridge University. Duke, I think, well, yeah, you know, I think about it. Oh, we had a poet coming to speak from the UK. That's Richard Hayes, our dean, with a guitar, which is particularly attractive. This is the double piano concert we did. That's me playing with Cordelia Williams, London-based concert pianist. The photographs here might interest you. Here, that's a photograph competition we set in the Divinity School. Each photograph is linked to a movement in the piece that we're playing, piece by Messiaen, that we're playing, and it really galvanized the Duke community, because they had to listen to this music, they had to photograph out of each of the piece, which is, the piece tells the story of creation to consummation. It's extraordinary. A piece by Messiaen, 2 pianos. Other things I just threw in. You might recognize this gentleman, I'm sure. I've met him before. Blessed be his name. This is Bruce Herman, another good artist. This is at King's College, Cambridge. We had an exhibit in the chapel, and Rowan Williams was just hiding behind there. Only a lesser figure compared to Mako, you understand. And there they are together, so that's nice. This is a famous BBC actress. You ever see Bend It Like Beckham? Oh, yeah, she was in that, but not has anything to do with what we're doing. This is the evening of Eliot's 4 quartets, and Rowan gave 4 addresses for that, because the paintings were all connected with the 4 quartets. So this is the kind of thing that we're trying to do. This is David Taylor, one of our star students, who now is running the Brem Center in Texas. Brem Center for Worship Theology and the Arts, part of Fuller Seminary. He's running that now in Texas. He's in touch with hundreds of artists trying to do the kind of thing that I've been demonstrating this evening. I think a last word from the great M.T. Wright, who I'm sure will be coming to Trinity Forum before long, if he hasn't already. I think this says it all. Christians need to sense permission to exercise their imagination in thinking ahead into God's new world, and into such fresh forms of worship and service as will model and embody aspects of it. We need to have this imagination energized, fed, and nourished, so that it is lively and inventive, not sluggishly going around the same, or I would say, the same small circles of a few ideas learned long ago. Amen to that. Thank you very much.
Conversation portion of our evening conversation, where Jeremy will be taking some questions from the audience. We don't have a lot of time, but hope we can run through several questions quite quickly. If you could raise your hand and wait for the microphone to come to you, that would be great. Just wait to be called on. And as ever, there's some questions right up here. Carrie, with the microphone up here. As always, we simply ask for your questions to be brief, civil, and in the form of a question.
Caroline.
You started with Bach's 2-part convention.
Yes.
I don't know much about his theology and his composition. I'm curious if you could just, what do you think about Bach, his composition, and how this might resonate?
I do a lecture series on Bach. No, not published yet. Bach, I think, is the ultimate Christian composer. I don't think anyone that comes close to the theological front. He couldn't write very good prose. He wasn't good at language. Letters were awful. He wasn't articulate, particularly. But he wasn't bad at the music side of things. And if he had composed only the opening chorus of Matthew Passion, he would be world famous. But that's only one of about 600 pieces of that standard. So there's something weird going on there. Why do I think? Is it because I could say very much more, but I think his music, the dynamics of that music, is embodying a Christian vision of the world. Was he a Christian? Yes, undoubtedly. He was a Lutheran Christian. Some people have tried to say he was exceptionally devout and holy for his time. No, not exceptionally devout. He was definitely devout. He took the Bible seriously. We have a copy of the Bible he has notes, let's see, all over it. I said we, I don't own this. Others have tried to be cynical, say, no, he wasn't really a Christian, he was just did the kind of church thing to get jobs. No, that's just silly. Not at all. And he has extraordinary biblical insight, because he is doing the kind of thing I'm trying to say here, approaching biblical text as a musician. So he's allowing the particular powers of music to unlock things that otherwise would not be heard. And that's why so many theologians will go to Bach, because they'll learn a huge amount about text. They're not going to learn that.
Other questions? Mary, up here in the front, Nancy. And if you could stand as you ask your question, that's great.
You're on a desert island, like desert island discs. What are your top 3?
Do you have desert island discs in this country?
No, but I was in the radio before.
Okay, do we know what this is? It's when you had to choose 7 pieces of music that you would take to a desert island. I've got to choose 3? Oh, heck. Well, it'll be something of Bach, undoubtedly. It'll be something of Brahms, because I think Brahms is kind of next. And then it'll be a whole range of things that I would have a lot of trouble. A lot of jazz, some songwriters that I love. Michael Bublé, I think his voice I could he could read the phone directory and I go, oh. So, and Brahms, it wasn't, he struggled with Brahms, but he combines a kind of passionate, emotional, the dread, and beautifully formed and structured at the same time. He doesn't spill out of it all. You know, it's discipline, but it's not a cold discipline. It's a profoundly warm discipline. That's why I love Brahms. I might play for Brahms. Well, no, maybe.
Other questions?
Yeah, well,
Jonah, right over here.
sorry, this
If you could stand as you ask your question, that'd be great.
Jonah, the Reverend.
Thank you very much for what you said. One of the most beautiful images that I've heard of the relationship between sin and freedom is in Tolkien's Silmarillion. The first story, right? Yeah. I was wondering, it's something I use with my students, and I'm always looking for a piece of music that would contain the initial melody, the dissonance, and then the resolution containing the dissonance. Do you have anything that would work of that sort?
There's a huge amount. There's a huge amount in which, almost any major symphony of the 19th century works like that. It will take in the dissonance, particularly the development section, and make something new out of it. Bach does it as well, of course. I don't know if it's Silmarillion exactly, but an example I do use, I gather this is on YouTube, I've never watched these things on YouTube, but it is sort of dissonance in a way, but there's a very interesting piece. By Paganini, and it's a very angular, unpromising, semi-dissonant, pretty banal little tune, very metallic, but it is fascinating composers because of what can be done with it. It's not hard dissonance, but it's getting on for it. The most famous set of variations on this tune, written by Rachmaninoff, Sergei Rachmaninoff, who wrote a huge piece of piano orchestra, and a famous variation is this. Well, how do you get from to that? But actually, it's like this. Take the, knock out the first note, turn that upside down, turn it from minor into major, and then go to D flat. He said to a friend, that one's from my agent. In other words, he knew it was a hit, and it has been ever since. Who would have guessed that out of that banal, pathetic little thing could come this? It's the resurrection of the body.
Other question, we'll take some, are there any in the back? Okay, we'll come back to the front, right up here, front row.
I was going to ask you, but you brought up Brahms.
Yeah.
And Brahms is kind of the opposite of Bach, because in letters, I think that he basically admitted at least being an agnostic or an atheist.
Yes, that's right. No,
And I'm wondering what you think about whether, notwithstanding his expression of faith or lack thereof, his music kind of represents kind of the ideal of, you know, the Christian concept of music and of tonality, and, you know, what you were talking about
because
today.
I think with Brahms, he combines these things, particularly about form and emotion, or form and expression, or something, in an extraordinary way. I think Bach does all that and much more. That also raises the question of how could Brahms, well, no, let's take plenty of other composers who were miserable human beings, I've got to say, gentlemen, but can create such glorious stuff. You know, Salieri, Mozart, Amadeus, that whole thing. And that's the Holy Spirit. We've got to believe that the Holy Spirit can work through the very worst kind of human being to create the most extraordinary kind of music. It just happens. Now, I'm not there by recommending someone isn't a Christian, or they can produce this or that. I think Brahms myself, I think Brahms struggled with faith. And I've got a lot of time for people like that. Mahler was another, at least at the early one, who really struggled. I've got less time for those who kind of totally made up their mind about that. And sometimes you can hear that in the music. Not always. It surprises. Sometimes I do takes on pieces of music written by people who are most definitely not believers, and I give it a kind of Christian take. And I've done that with living composers sometimes. And they're not angry. They say, that's interesting, I hadn't thought of that. I said, no, it's okay. If that's right, that's what I would say. It's the work of the Holy Spirit. Let's hope for you yet.
Second row,
Jesus,
Tom.
Lord.
And if you can stay.
Thank you. What an enlightening and inspiring evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The biggest clash we face on our planet between Islam and the West. How do you mentioned briefly that you had worked with a Muslim cleric on the Trinity. Do you see any potential for a common language or harmonics between these two civilizations, or broader, the Abrahamic faiths?
Wow. Well, I mean, I pray for that regularly. At Duke, there was a wonderful, actually, wonderful student of mine, David Marshall, who runs the Anglican House of Studies there, but he was chaplain to Rowan Williams, and is very much an expert on the Islamic Christian faith. There's all sorts of fascinating conversations going on there. And I think also some headway is being made, but the sticking point is the Trinity. There's no doubt. For Islam, God is absolutely undifferentiated oneness, absolute monistic oneness. There can be no internal kind of differentiation within God. With this Muslim cleric, I did use music, but I took him to a lot of Old Testament or Abrahamic stories and scriptures, and tried to show that what's at stake is, in the Christian view, that love is internal to who God is. That's what the Trinity is saying. Father loves the Son, whether He's created the world or not. That's the Father. The love is built into who God is. For Islam, that isn't the case. Not for traditional Islam. God can be merciful, can be love, but these are potential attributes, potential ways of acting towards the world. So that's the sticking point. One of the most encouraging things, I've not been directly involved, but a very close colleague of mine, David Ford at Cambridge, has been involved in a movement called scriptural reasoning. And he's even had an MBE for his work on interfaith relations. He's a profoundly committed Christian. But scriptural reasoning, what they do is Jews, Muslims, and Christians get together, not to talk about ideas or issues, or even world peace or anything, but to study each other's scriptures. And of course, sometimes that means common scriptures, Abraham and Isaac, for instance, or whatever. And they just covenant with each other to sit together for 3-4 hours or whatever, studying each other's scriptures, and deep praying openly like that. I'm not saying, oh, well, that will instantly produce world harmony. No, but it's a start. And the great thing about it is it's text-based and not issue-based. So you simply have to respect the other in a new way. They just say, well, how are they reading? And of course, if they're reading a text in a different way, you can't just say, well, you've got it wrong. You might think, hey, they're making me see something I'm not seeing in my own text. But I have no sympathy with what you're dead right. It is the issue of the future. But what we need, of course, admittedly, is new modes of imagination so we can have serious conversation with each other and not just sling over ideas. I know, well, I'm not done. I know.
Who's the Bach in this one?
I know, it's a very good point. I don't know. I was speaking at a conference in Jerusalem not so long ago on peacemaking and the art. It was a multi-faith gathering, and I was doing my bit. And there are the most extraordinary experiments going on, active music making. I don't know about a Bach in Islam. But you've got things like East-West Divine Orchestra. Do you know about Daniel Baron? Oh, Daniel Baron, one great conductor, set up this young 20-year-olds, basically, Arabs and Israeli. He set up this professional orchestra, which is just world-class standard. And they, to begin with, they just couldn't speak to each other. But as one of them said after one of the concerts, and you can look it all up on YouTube, it's astounding music. He said, it's very hard to demonize someone you just played Tchaikovsky with. And listen, you've sung with anyone. You know, in jam session, guitar, jazz, it's very hard to demonize that person. At least now we might start listening to each other. And Baron was good. He said it's not going to solve world peace, but it's something. It's something. Thank you. I think we better.
Questions in the back. Don't want to ignore anyone back there. Me, right there. You could stand.
In your view, is music basically neutral and sort of infinitely malleable, or is it done right, always sort of transcendent or pointed?
Thank you. Great question. Enormous one, so I'll be very brief. It is a matter of fact that music operates through physical media, obviously, and interacts with our nervous system and our bodies in very particular ways, which means that you can't say of a particular bit of music or pattern of notes, it can mean anything to anybody. It is not infinitely malleable. It just ain't. Lullabies, the world over, have roughly the same features. Surprise, surprise. That is, they're slow, they will tend to have a rocking movement, there won't be great jumps in the pitch of the melody, they'll be gentle, and they'll be quiet. Surprise, surprise. So you can't say things, you can't say of particular pattern that it is infinitely malleable. But you have to say there is enormous cultural variation on what will be done with a particular pattern of notes. Almost universal is something like the octave, surprise, surprise, because that's built into the harmonic series. But the way that the West has used the harmonic series, the overtones within it, is only one way of dividing up the octave. We have 12 divisions, but not everyone does. Some have 5, some have 15, some have got to. So they'll do that in different ways. All of them have a kind of common root, but it can be developed in all sorts of interesting ways. So the answer, is it nature or nurture? Both. Music operates because of universal features of our makeup and the world we live in, and by cultural overlay. And that's like a lot of things.
So we're going to take one more question, and then Jeremy, I understand you're going to finish us off with a short piece of music.
If you wish, yes, very happy.
One last question in the back. Anyone in the back? No. Okay, right over there. Could you stand?
Hi, I really enjoyed your lecture. My name is Kayla, and I'm the Director of Music and Worship at Mount Vernon Place, just a couple blocks over
Hey, great.
from here. And I wanted to know, with unlocking freedom, how would you differentiate between music as a form of worship versus music as performance?
Performance. Oh, sometimes it's very hard to tell. I'm not against performance per se, but in worship, it all depends on where your mind is going to repose ultimately, or where your heart's going to repose ultimately. Is it on the good-looking worship leader? Is it on, wow, they have great dexterity, which is okay, and it's all right to say, thank God they're good-looking. I mean, that's all right. That's a gift of God, and musical skill is a gift of God. But if that's where it ends, that's a problem. how do you ensure that doesn't happen? That's very hard. In my own view, with most worship bands, I put them out of sight in the gallery. In the 18th century, into the 19th, in England, we had these traditional gallery bands, I don't really remember, but musicians from the locality, instrumentalists, and they, before the organ came, and they stuck them in the gallery, and it got underneath the singing. It was fascinating, the music from that time as well. I just got a problem with having to stare at the same kind of people who are nearly always good looking. I think if you're ugly and want an interesting career, I'd try worship leading, because I think we need people like you. That's not to be quoted. That's a great question. Okay. Sorry. Some of the Paganini thing. It just struck me. This is another set of variations on the Paganini theme. So everything you're going to hear comes out of this little tune. It's by a Turkish virtuoso called Fazil Say-What. And it's very American, really. It's Bernstein and Copeland, and with bits of Marvin Gaye and all sorts of stuff, as well as a bit of Bach and a bit of Schubert, and also it's the kind of classic eclectic mix. But it's huge fun, and it's a way of saying thank you very much.
conclusion, it falls to me to ask me to turn your attention and contemplation from the vast enjoyments of Jeremy's music to the small brochure on your seat, which is an invitation to you to join the Trinity Forum Society. As we've talked about earlier, in an environment where culturally it's characterized by triviality and distraction, politically by divisiveness and rancor, one of the things we try to do is provide a space to encourage the discussion of life's ultimate questions in a way that is both intellectually rigorous and warmly hospitable. I hope you've enjoyed a taste of that this evening. If you have, we very much and warmly and hospitably invite you to join the Trinity Forum Society, which helps make programs like this possible. There are, of course, other benefits. Some of those benefits include our quarterly readings, such as Handel's Messiah, which we would commend to you. Anyone who joins tonight, simply take your pick of readings at the back. There's also other benefits, such as our daily curated list of reading recommendations and invitations to events like this. So we hope you'll avail yourself of that. We also hope that you will join us for future evening conversations. Our next evening conversation at the Trinity Forum here in DC is October 21st at the National Press Club, featuring psychiatrist and neuroscientist Kurt Thompson speaking about his new book, The Soul of Shame. And stay tuned for the next Trinity Forum and Duke School of Divinity evening conversation as topic and speaker to be announced that will be happening in the spring, and hope that you will come and join us for that. Of course, it's only appropriate to end with thanks, and there's much to be thankful for. We so appreciate Dan Struble at Duke Divinity School and Jeremy Begbie for his incredible performance and talk. I'd also just like to thank my colleagues who've done a lot to make this evening possible. Margaret Everly, Colleen O'Malley, Alyssa Abraham, as well as our excellent interns, Carrie Lucas, Nancy Ritter, and Britta Friesen. Again, thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for coming, and good night.
Our Dean with the guitar, which is particularly attractive. This was the double piano concert we did. That's